The next section of some formulas that we can use. We've explored double angles, we've explored power functions, and now we can also look at some half angles as well. Again, we use these in case we get an angle that we're not familiar with, but maybe it's an angle that's half of one that we are familiar with. So for example, obviously, let's find the exact value of the cosine of 112.5. Odd that we choose that value. Well, we chose it to kind of help us illustrate what we're trying to work through. So if I can recognize that the cosine of 112.5 is also the same thing as the cosine of 225 all over 2. And 225, that's an angle that I am familiar with. So let's look at the half angle of the cosine function, which tells me that I have plus or minus. So right down here, cosine of 225 over 2 is plus or minus the root of 1 plus cosine of x, or my alpha, or alpha in that case, which is 225, all over 2. All right, the first question we need to ask ourselves is, what sign? Is it a plus or minus that I have here? Well, in order, the cosine of 112.5, if I remember where that's in the second quadrant. And all cosines are negative in the second quadrant. So that being the case, I'm going to use the negative value of this problem. So then let's just work our problem out. 1 plus the cosine of 225. That is one of the regular or the more common values that we see, and that's root 2 over 2. And since it's in negative, it's a negative because that's in the third quadrant. Second and third quadrant, cosines are negative, and so we have a negative value there, all over 2. Let's go ahead and simplify that out a little bit, clean it up. Let me clean it up a little bit first. In doing that, let's multiply the top and bottom by 2 over 2. Clever version of 1. That's inside the parentheses, like that, like that. So 2 times 2 gives me a 2. 2 minus root 2 gives me a 2 minus 2 root 2. Oh, no, let me strike that back. That eliminates that particular 2. So I just have 2 minus root 2, and 2 times 2 gives me a 4. Next step, since I do not like having denominators with roots in it, so let's go ahead and break that on up. So that becomes root 2 minus root 2 all over root 4. Root 4, we know, becomes a 2. So I have root 2 minus a root 2. And that becomes the value of cosine of 112.5. Again, I didn't know what 112.5 the exact value was. I could use a calculator, which a lot of times we'll do. But I also want to let you know that we can solve these without such a device by trying to understand what's going on. And we recognized 112.5 as being half of an angle I did know, which lends us to why we approach the problem from this angle.